Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at onpurposely.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. You are listening to our 7-episode series that is the Gospel Tech Crash Course. If you have found us through the Purposely Podcast Network, if you've just found us through friends who've shared it, you want to start here because we have 120 some odd episodes at this point, and that's a lot of information. So what we've done is we've condensed the top 7, an episode on each of the topics that parents ask us about most. This is video games, social media and smartphones, pornography, safe tech at home, just the big picture on technology and the gospel that'll ground us in this conversation so that you can then go back and make sense of what you're going to hear, but you don't have to start at episode 1 and listen to 2+ years worth of content. So welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. Thank you for being here. I hope you were encouraged, and I'm excited to be on this journey with you. Welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast, a resource for parents who feel overwhelmed and outpaced as they raise healthy youth in a tech world. As an educator, parent, and tech user, I want to equip parents with the tools, resources, and confidence they need to raise kids who love God and use tech. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. My name is Nathan Sutherland, and this podcast is dedicated to helping families love God and use tech. Our conversation today is 5 reasons to delay a smartphone for your child. This conversation is really rooted in the pushback we get as adults and the poor communication we give as adults about smartphones. Our kids want them. By the time we run into the teenage years, we are dealing with well over 3/4 of young people will have a smartphone. Your kids are not lying when they say, I'm the only one in class, because they're probably only one of 3 or 4 in their class of 30 or so who do not have a smartphone. And so the conversation needs to be, are we getting you a smartphone? And if we're not, why? There has to be a reason beyond, well, I just don't like it. Go work outside. Because at the end of the day, that's not doing anything for your kid's heart. And we talk here at Gospel Tech about how our conversations are going to be focused in the gospel first and then acting out of that truth. And so when we talk about that, what does it look like? And why would that lead us to delaying? We're going to talk about those 5 reasons. What can we do instead? And how can we talk this out with our kiddos? Because they're smart. And whether they're 6 or 16, our young people are going to understand the bigger picture about what their hope is set in, what this tech will do for them, how it might hamper them, what's the trade-off, and how we can be well prepared for an age when they will have a smartphone, because there's a really good chance they will. So what are we doing to prepare their hearts, minds, behaviors for that time in life? And how can we do that lovingly in light of the gospel? So today, let's talk about the 5 reasons to delay a smartphone for your child, because many of us have faced this. My oldest is 8, next is 6, and both of them have friends who have access to smartphones, and a couple of their friends, the 8-year-old's friends, have smartphones. In fact, when he was in, it was in kindergarten. He's in 2nd grade now. So when he was in kindergarten as a 6-year-old, there were kids in kindergarten with personal smartphones. They would come, they'd play Minecraft, they would play their games, and they had those phones in class. So I don't know where you live or how that works where you are, but that isn't unheard of here in the Northwest. And we have to have this conversation. Our kids are going to come and say, well, can I have it? They're not devising anything crazy. They just want to know, that thing looks awesome, I want some. They ask you for ice cream, they ask you for Doritos, they're going to ask you for a smartphone, right? This is something you didn't offer me, mom and dad, so can I have it? And here's the big picture. The big picture is often we frame the question as adults, well, does my child need this thing? And the short answer is no. Your kid does not need a smartphone. There are even medical devices that can implement it, but they're very convenient and they're often quite affordable compared to other things. So I know a family whose daughter has diabetes and they have the blood monitor connected to their smartphone, right? And so it actually goes to her smartphone and it's like linked with the parents. And that's how because of proximity, the parents don't want the phone in their room. So that's where the notifications will come to the parents if a blood sugar spike or dip happens in the middle of the night, for example, or during the school day. She keeps it on her and it will notify the parents. And that's a really cool resource, right? So I understand those situations. Let's take out of those really niche, neat hyper tech situations where our quality of life can improve and our safety can improve. And let's just talk smartphone in general. There's really 5 reasons we don't need a smartphone. And the first overarching point, which we'll tackle all 4 of our next points, but the first big idea is that smartphones are app delivery systems. That is what they are. So when a company sells you a smartphone, 3 big ones are Google, Samsung, and Apple. When you purchase that hardware, the physical device, they're not making money on that. It costs way more to produce that, especially right now with what's happening with the microprocessing chips and all of the technology that goes into it and the mining of random minerals that is almost impossible for them to get right now. These devices cost a ton. So how are we still getting them for $1,000, which sounds like a lot until you realize what's going into these things. It costs more than $1,000 to make one of these. Why are they selling it for that? Because they're making money on ads and on apps. These are app delivery systems. And the entire premise of all of this is goals get you to engage with a lot of different apps and then sell you ads and licensing rights for your attention. Most of those apps are going to be focused on consumption, not creation, meaning they're drool tech, not tool tech. So it's going to help you watch shows. It's going to help you purchase things that you didn't know you wanted because there's an algorithm driving you stuff. Consume content through social media or through reels and snippets and things like that, or consume news. And the entire premise is we're going to direct your attention towards things that we think you need to know or need to purchase. And with the bigger picture of engagement in terms of entertainment technology, they're trying to capture your attention, your time, and your money. Right? So your attention is they need to keep you coming back. So they don't just want one big blast out of you. They want, if it's a 30-second blast, they want 3 instead of 2, 10 instead of 8, right? Like they just want that extra touch or 2, and that's how they're going to get you. So it's your focus. They want you coming back frequently and redirecting your focus often. They want your time. They want that to accumulate over a single day. They're going to compete with as many different things as they can to accrue as much time as they can get. And then they want your money at the end of the day when they're not selling your time and your focus for money. So that's really important to know. App delivery system is not beneficial to basically anything that you're trying to do as a young person. So when a kid comes and says, Mom and Dad, can I have this smartphone? The first question should be, well, let's talk about that. Why do you want one? Right? Because as a second point to that, so that's our first, is that these are app delivery systems. And the number one thing that that's going to affect is distraction. So when your child, usually when they say, can I have a smartphone? What they mean is, Mom and Dad, I want social media. So just know that. That's like code. Mom and Dad, I want to be on social media. Can I have a smartphone? Because that's what gives me the independence to be on social media. And that's really a 2-part conversation. The first part is, child of mine whom I love, that's great that you want a smartphone. Why do you want it? They're like, well, I want to be on social media. Social media brings with it all the worst parts of teenage life with all the most powerful parts of digital life. It's constantly there. It's always available. It follows you wherever you go, and it never, ever stops. It does not run out. It does not burn out. It does not sleep, right? So you have now the trauma of being 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and all of the worst parts of technology, leveraging that into this unholy monster that can really beat our kids down or drive them into rabbit holes of thought or of content that are unhealthful and unhealthy for them. It can be as simple as they're just keeping up on global news, but they're not seeking out the news. They're not researching the news. They're not learning how to process information. Instead, they're getting blasted with really heavy content. If you've been following the conflict in Ukraine right now, you get blasted with really heavy content. I mean, you can go from dances of, friends of yours to famous people, doing their stand-up bits, and the very next thing can be bodies laying in streets somewhere in Ukraine, or child trafficking somewhere in Central Africa. Like the whiplash you can get, not to mention the sexual content that's on there, but just talking the extremities of things that you might want to know, but they're as Neil Postman would say, who wrote Amusing Ourselves to Death, he'd say it's shotgunning with scraps, right? Or machine gunning, I believe is the way he said it, with scraps. They're taking just little bits of really intense information and they're just bop, 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 rapid fire hitting you with it. And if you pause on one, or if you scroll back to it, or if you comment on it, or you share it, that feeds into the algorithm. And TikTok, for example, within the first 10 minutes, they can peg you for what your interests are, what you are most susceptible to clicking on and being interested in, and it's going to drive you to the most extreme ends of that. The reason I bring that up is when your child says, I want social media, we need to understand this isn't just a place to hang out with your friends that's an open play field. It's directed, it's intentional, it's designed for engagement in the worst sense of the word. Engagement can be fine. There's just usability engagement, that it works well so you want to use it more. That's not what we're talking about here. This is algorithm-driven and even machine learning-driven use of technology. So to give some super specifics, your child says, Mom and Dad can have a smartphone. You go, hey, those are app delivery systems. Let's call them what they are. Why do you want a smartphone, child of mine? If they say, I want social media, here's 9 concerns we have with social media this is the second part about it being distracting. First is notifications. So I've brought this up before, but it's really important to know that little candy-colored app will get a little red circle. Red is important. The circle is important. It tells you that you have things that you need to know. Maybe someone reached out to you. Maybe the program just realized you haven't done anything in a while, and it just wanted to tell you random facts, like so-and-so that you've never talked to in 15 years had a birthday yesterday. Like, it just wants you to know and come back in and maybe catch you up in the feed. And again, take a little of your focus, take a little of your time. So notifications are a big one. Word processor doesn't do that. So social media is going to be unique in its drool techiness. Infinite scroll, the idea that you can always scroll to the bottom of the feed and it's always going to give you something new. Swipe to refresh. If you ever reach the bottom of a feed, you can just pull down like a slot machine and it'll give you the little swirly and pop you up something new, right? That is intentional. That was designed to feel like a slot machine. You can see that there's books written about this, Hooked by Nir Eyal, and one that I'm forgetting, I'll post it in the show notes. A lady did an amazing research on the use of slot machine behavioral design in social media and also in Social Dilemma. They talk about this, but infinite scroll. So it brings it up, followed by swipe to refresh, where you swipe down. Candy colored apps is intentional. They design those in the colors that draw your attention and focus most. If you want to fix that, you can read our piece on how to make your smartphone a dumb phone on gospeltech.net. But you can take away those colors, go grayscale, and you can actually give yourself a little 3-button click to go back to color if you need it for maps or something, because there is some functionality there. But you can leave that off for the most part. Likes and follows are all about behavioral design, encouraging you to do things that people will like and people will follow, and discouraging behavior that doesn't get you that, which leads us to FOMO. Our 6th one is fear of missing out. There's always something you could be in the know about and something you could be finding out, and you're always checking back in because what if something exciting happened? I don't know who wrote me. I don't know what's on there. I don't know what new, exciting, tantalizing bit. This is me. I've confessed this before. This is me with news apps. I'm just always checking just a little headline. Just, is anything juicy out there right now? And it's not intentional. That's not a thought. I don't stop and think, you know what? I bet something happened in that one specific event, and I'm going to go look that up right now. I'm just going to go check the app and see if anything came up. It's a horrible habit, and it is not easy to break because it's natural and it's wired into us to be curious and ask questions. The problem is we're not asking questions. We've been trained to this point to just show up and see if they have anything to feed us. It's literally why it's called a feed, where our information pops up. That's your news feed. 7, it impacts your focus and your sleep. By this point in all of these, with notifications and scrolls and swipes and candy colors and likes and follows and fear of missing out, all of a sudden now you're not fully present. And in fact, I can tell you the times of day when I'm most likely to check that news app. It's when I'm writing and I reach a little block at the end of a paragraph or whatever, and I just can't come up with the next idea, and I want to I just need to break focus for a minute. I'll grab my phone. Instead of going for a walk, instead of doing some push-ups, instead of reading a book, instead of doing whatever, I'll pick up my phone, and I'll just great, I'll just take a couple moments here. And all of a sudden, 7, 12, 15 minutes later, right, I don't remember what I was doing because I was on my phone. Or my real confession time, as soon as Hadley's asleep and I grab my phone to go turn on an audiobook through the speaker for the boys, I will check my news app on the way walking up the stairs, right? Which if anything happens, I will end up stopped on the stairs reading my news app because I found this interesting and forgetting what I'm supposed to be doing, right? Like that's not okay. That's not me going to be informed. That's me consuming as entertainment stuff that's really important that I should be prayerful and intentional and take action on. But I'm not going to do that on the way to turn on Audible for my kids. Like I'm just doing this as a really bad habit. So impacts our focus and then our sleep. Many of us do that before bed or the first thing we get up, and that's affecting the way our brains can rest and be present. 8 is that we can compare bodies. Both boys and girls have different versions of body dysmorphia from internet images, not even pornography, just seeing people filtered and seeing people who are being celebrated with likes and followers. We start to think that our body should look like that. And it's not just, well, that person's skinny or fit. Oftentimes it's literally how their body looks. And oftentimes it's filtered or edited. So their eyes are bigger than are actually possible. Their abs are more profound and pronounced than can actually be possible. And we start to get this idea of this is what beautiful is. It's just like what happened with magazines, in the 90s and early 2000s, but now it's people we know or people that are our age at least. And it's so rapid and it's so diverse that we begin to believe that this is normal when it's not even possible. So that's huge. And then finally, social media is bad for our mental health. At the end of the day, social media has been shown, as the Senate hearings have shown with Instagram, specifically with young ladies, to drive negative feelings about their bodies and negative feelings about themselves as a result of that. And then when it comes to cyber relationships, that girls specifically, I was just reading this research today, 9 to 12-year-olds, so that what they would call tweens, are far more likely to bear the brunt of negative online social relationships. So just friends that say mean things, or a gamer who says something mean when they're playing a video game together, and they rattle off in the mouth and just say stupid things, that girls are actually then more likely. It was literally 2% for boys and 20% for girls on the likelihood that would become a personal reflection that they would then begin to ingest and believe about themselves. And that then impacts your ability to feeling, or your feelings of anxiety and your feelings of stress and your feelings of depression, because you start ingesting that negative talk as a reflection on yourself. So that's just, mom and dad, can I have a smartphone? Why do you want it? Social media. Those are 9 reasons to say no. The reason I bring them up and walk you through them is, one, I want you to know, it's not just, no, social media is bad, because well, you're on it, mom and dad. It's true. Mom and dad probably model some really unhealthy habits, as I just walked you through with some of mine. But as a young developing brain, as a kid who's still figuring out what it means to be a friend and have a friend, what it looks like to be loving, what it looks like to live out Jesus' call to love our neighbors as ourselves and love God with all we are. What does that even mean? I don't know. It gets even harder to know if you can't focus long enough, because the thing in your pocket, that thing on your bedstand, that thing that you carry with you throughout the day is not just distracting, but it's distracting and intentionally fighting your focus. It's one thing for me to just get distracted, because I get distracted. Way before smartphones, I was getting distracted. But now this thing is designed to do that, because that's how they make a profit. Like, that's important for us to know, and it's important then for us to talk out with our kids. 6-year-olds probably don't need to know all that. To say, hey, this can be unhealthy for your heart and for your brain, right? Like, that could be enough. And if they say, how? You can compare it to something like sugar or other content that you don't let little kids have, right? This is unhealthy. You can have this when you get older. We'll talk about how to handle it responsibly. You can choose how you want to handle that conversation. With older kids, we need to talk about this. Hey, have you ever seen this happen? Have you ever experienced this when you have been online? But that's our second conversation when we're talking about it being an app delivery system. It's distracting, and social media is that specific focus. But social media is not the only thing, right? There are video games as well. So our third point on why are we not going to give a video game or a smartphone right away? Why are we going to delay longer than maybe would be convenient even, is because, well, video games aren't maybe what you and I think of with video games. We think many of us grew up playing video games. Many of us play video games right now. We're like, they're fine. They're fun. It's not a huge deal. My kid's a responsible, good kid, so it shouldn't be that much for them. And I guess I just want to set some context. Video games right now are a $179 billion industry as of just 2020. So those 2021 numbers are still coming out. But This idea in the US alone, it was $41 billion. So here's what that means. If you took the NFL, their best year of revenue was 2019, $16 billion. If you took Major League Baseball, their best year was 2019, $11 billion of revenue. If you took the National Hockey League, their best year was 2018, going into 2019, with $5 billion. So if you took those three sports and merged them in just the U.S., video games in the U.S. did 28% more revenue than all three of them combined. Okay, and that's just in the U.S. That's not even looking at the growth markets for the video game industry, which is going to be India and Brazil and China, although China did just heavy lockdown, so we'll see how that ends up. But Brazil and India are where a lot of the tech is going, and they're not going to necessarily be playing PS5s. They're making consoles that can run off less power, that can run more light in terms of their processing power, and that can run even over some of the Starlink internet ideas where they may not have internet in their home. It'll be more of a general area Wi-Fi. So they need lots of people to be able to play over a low amount of bandwidth. I only tell you that because video games are not going away. It's not just something for kids. The average age of a gamer is 38, which means when your kid gets a PS5, when they get their new Xbox One X, when they get their new PC, those top-end video games are not actually made for 12-year-olds, for 14-year-olds, for 16-year-olds. They are made for 38-year-olds who've played video games for a very long time and who have built up a resistance and are now resilient to that much draw of a video game. And we need that next system. That's the reason we keep upgrading. If the original Nintendo was still exciting to us, we'd still be doing that. But the reason we need virtual reality, the reason we need augmented reality is because we've kind of scorched our senses to the point where these games are fine, but what's the next thing, right? Graphics have kind of peaked at this point. That did for a while. What's the next thing? I need this thing beamed directly into my retinas, right? For this to still feel exciting. And we need to keep that in mind, that when we're talking video games with our kids, there's really three things to keep in mind. They can be hyper-stimulating. So the rapid pace, they're goal-driven, they're highly replayable, which makes them fun, but also makes them hard to put down. And if our kid takes that kind of a video game to school, now it's hard to engage in social relationships, in their education, in their focus, even to sleep at night, not because they're playing late, but because their brain is running through that game and reliving that experience, and maybe even just hyped up because they played games in the last hour or two. And that's really important because when you run through that list, that's literally Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You're talking sleep, relationships, food, and your future in terms of education. Those are really important if we're giving what we need up to get something we want. Well, that's the definition of an addiction. So we want to make sure we're intentional about that and not building unhealthy compulsive habits, but instead we are giving ourselves space. We can have our gaming devices and then we go and do our other things, right? That would be the healthiest way, and young brains don't need that extra distraction. A second would be just unhealthy content. In terms of video games, this is microtransactions. So they're encouraging you to buy stuff and making you feel dissatisfied with what you have. Often they'll be called free-to-play games, where you can join this game at a base level, but the game's entire point is to show you how little you have and how dissatisfied you should be, and how for just $1.99 or $5.99 or $15.99, you could have a way better player experience, and they'll just microtransact you into doom. So Fortnite would be an example where they make billions of dollars on the game, but it's free to play, and they don't sell you ads. They just sell you stuff. So that's one side of it. And the other side is just some of the content is inappropriate. Video games are massive pathways for big conversations. And so whether it's talking about spirituality in a video game that is talking about, angels and demons or those kinds of conversations, or if they're talking about just existential purpose, there are big time games that talk about what is reality and what is time and what does it mean to exist. And it could be as popular as something like a Left 4 Dead, where it's a zombie game where you kind of tackle those big conversations, or it can actually be part of the plot where you're actually talking through time and existence and God. And those are in major, what we'd call AAA games, games that are very popular. So just know that that's out there, and we don't want those just going straight to our kids' device, straight into their brains. We want to be part of that conversation and help them process some of those really heavy topics. And then the third reason is that games are meant to be fun. And usually a game it's based off challenge, competition, a storyline, even the artwork. So most of us have learned to make not fun things fun by making it a game, right? I was just doing yard work with my sons this past weekend, and we were working in the garden, and we made a game of, hey, who can finish their row fastest when we're tilling the soil with a shovel, right? Who can find the biggest clump of clay in this dirt? Because where we live in the state of Washington, it's just clay and rocks. It's not great soil where we are. Who can pick up the most socks from this pile of laundry and put them away first, right? It becomes a race. It becomes a competition. It becomes these silly little games. But when we get to video games, sometimes they're actually programmed to be unhealthy. So turn limits would be an example of this. You play a game, but you can only take so many actions, and you either have to wait a day, or you have to wait an hour, or you have to pay 50 cents or $1, right? You buy this many gems, and that gets you X amount of extra turns. That is something to build in dissatisfaction into the game, right? That's unhealthy when we're talking about developing brains and their inability to control impulses. And that's a physical thing. Like you do a scan of their brain while they're trying to inhibit an action like that. And the front part of their brain, the orbital frontal cortex, does not fire like it will when they're 25. It just doesn't work the same. It's not fully developed. It's not functioning yet. That's an unfair advantage towards the game. So the only thing you can do then, instead of just asking them to be responsible, is actually distance that and give them another buffer. The second is rapid feedback. Sound effects and environmental responses are a huge part of game design, and it's to make the game satisfying, right? I can hear a good hit. I can hear a miss. I can hear where I'm at. And that ambient involvement in the game is really attractive because it makes it more real and engaging. Things like loot. If I play this level and I beat this boss, then I might get this thing. That's really a powerful draw to replay it and make plans and to adjust my time so I can have enough to get back to it. And as a non-gamer, you may think that sounds silly, but in-game loot matters. And that will be more true as real-world money comes into play in future days, months, and years. And then the last one really in the video game world, that attraction piece we want to be intentional with is goals, quests, and rewards, right? The game sets up goals that feel important. And we now, as I mentioned earlier, give up our Maslow's hierarchy of need in order to attain that goal. I'm going to give up my sleep. I'm going to give up my relationships. I'm going to give up my money. I'm going to give up my future in terms of study in order to attain this thing. And we just want to be really intentional on how we're handling that. And then, all right, so we've said so far, what are our 5 reasons? We said it's an app delivery system. It's easy to get distracted with social media first and with video games second. And we just walked through a couple ways video games can be distracting. The 4th reason to delay smartphones is strangers. I guess the easiest way to handle this is Bark is a program that helps us see just the concerning content that our kids come across through text messages, even emails, search history, images they come across, conversations they have, but we're not getting a constant feed of what they're doing. We're not reading through every line of their text or everything on their phone. We're not looking at every picture. Instead, there's a very smart algorithm that allows us to just get notified when concerning words, phrases, or habits show up. So that group, Bark, did a study. They made an online profile. They made multiple, but they made an 11-year-old girl, a 15, and a 17-year-old girl. And within the first 90 seconds, it was on Instagram. It was a public profile, but they did not post anything like anyone in bathing attire or anything where that might be suggestive of inappropriate actions even. It was just pictures of like a mug they painted and flowers and just very basic stuff. Within 90 seconds, they began getting requests for live video chats, direct messages that were unrequested, unsolicited, and sexual images sent directly to these accounts. Bark says that the stuff that was sent to the 11-year-old was actually the most profane. And what's important to know is that our children are often quite good in real life at getting a feel for unhealthy people, right? They just kind of have that vibe. They can look at them, they can talk to them, and they just feel something's off, even if they can't put their finger on it. But it's really hard in digital life to read what we might call tricky people, right? We need to have very clear conversations with our children about this. And in order to be able to do that, we have to be able to talk about pornography, sex, sexual abuse, and sexual predators. And so basically our goal our litmus for should our children have social media, one of those checkboxes needs to be, can we talk about this with our kids openly, without shame, without threatening them? Can we talk about this in a loving manner and saying, this is real, this is on there, here's how we're going to address it, here's what it means. And until we can do that, our kids should not have social media, which means they should not have a smartphone, because a smartphone's only goal is to get you social media and things like it, right? By the way, at this point, I'll talk in a little bit about what we should do instead. So that's number 4 is strangers. We need to be intentional. And I'll just share this here, I guess. An increase in screen time outside of school comes with this. And so this is the second part. So strangers is part, I guess, 4A, and 4B is bullies. On this idea that our more time online means we're more likely to get bullied. So starting with COVID through 2020 and into 2021, the increase in screen time outside of school. So not your Zoom or your Teams call for your classes. But outside of that, it went up 17%. So those 9 to 12-year-olds average 5 hours a day on tech that isn't schoolwork. Teens average 8.5 hours a day. This is Common Sense Media 2021. So it's a national study within the United States. 5 hours a day, not including school, 8.5 hours a day for teens. In that increased amount of time, we've seen an increase in cyberbullying. So in 2021, a study done by a group called Light found a 70% increase in bullying and abusive language among kids and teens on social media and chat forums. A 70% increase. So the more time you spend on there, the more likely you're going to wear some of that. And that, again, when that was the same research that I was reading, when young ladies are more likely to then take that and have that impact their mental health. I did not go into why that might be, but boys tend to play video games, and that's where they run into their bullying and their negative conversations with strangers and that kind of stuff is live chat in a game. And girls, it was more on social media, but it happens to boys and girls. It happens to a large number of them. We're talking upwards of 75% of young people have witnessed or experienced it themselves. So they've either seen it happen to someone in a game, in a chat room, in a messaging or a feed through social media, or they've actually experienced it, or they've been witness to it, or experienced it themselves. So that's our fourth reason is strangers and bullying. We don't need to make the teenage years harder than they already are, the tween years harder than they already are. Instead, we need to give our children space. So again, if we're willing to talk to our kids about that and we feel we can have these conversations clearly and openly, that's great. Which brings us to the fifth point, is that pornography is out there. The average age of exposure, according to Screen Strong, is 11 years old. And that boys aged 12 to 17 are the largest consumers of online pornography. And that's WOTA 2014 is the study that brought that up. And that was 8 years ago. So there's a really good chance with the proliferation of smartphones since then that age has even dropped. 12 to 17 is intense. 11 years old for just our exposure is intense. Again, the conversation then is if we're letting our child online, we have to be both willing to give the support they need in trust, knowing that we love them and we want them to be healthful. So we're going to put something like Bark on that device to help it stay safe. And we're going to make sure we have a really clear conversation about pornography. Young kids, it's good picture, bad picture. It's just a great spot to start. It basically gives you a story to read through with your child rather than talking at them. And it lets you talk about, here's what pornography effectively is. There's these unkind pictures of people being unsafe and unloving. And here's what we do. We turn away. We go and tell our mom or our dad or our caring adult, right? We go and tell our teacher, not because we're going to get in trouble, but because we care about our hearts and we care about these people, right? And that is a wonderful spot to start. And then from there, we have to have all of those conversations about pornography, sex, predators, right? We have to be able to do that without shame, fear, or threats. And I don't mean to say, hey, no shame, whatever's good to go goes, but instead coming at it from that hope-focused kindness of, no, this is wrong. It's okay that mom and dad have these feelings, even if you have these feelings, right? Like anger's a fine emotion to have about this. Shame will happen, but what we don't want to have happen is for you to start to believe that shame and start thinking that making a mistake makes you a mistake. Like that is what the conversation of Jesus is actually all about, is that we no longer have to bear our own sins before the Lord and somehow be good enough to earn our way onto his team, but instead by faith, meaning believing that Jesus gives us his goodness and living out of that. Following what God says, where we see in all of Scripture is displaying God's character and his goodness, understanding that part of his goodness is his wrath and anger towards sin, and that then in Jesus, we don't bear that anymore. We don't kill animals anymore because Jesus took all of that sin. He was both the lamb that was slain, and he's the great high priest who then offers that regular sacrifice every single day, every single moment for us, so that when we're covered in Jesus, you'll hear that language in the Bible, it's like putting on clothes of Jesus. At one point, it's even called the bride garments of Christ, that we put on these wedding clothes, and when God looks at us, he's pleased because he sees Christ, right? So what do you need to have that? Well, you just put your faith in Christ. You say, what do I get for my purpose today? Christ is my purpose today. What do I get for my value today? Christ is my value today. Not my job, not my goodness, not my family, not my money, not my self-sacrifice. Those things might happen, but that's not where I'm getting my value. When I do, I repent. Why? Because my value needs to be in Christ, and so this is wrong. So in that, we have that conversation with our kids and go, okay, child of mine, pornography is real. Sex is real. Here's what we say about that. Here's what we know about that. And here's what we do in light of the gospel. It doesn't have to define you. That doesn't mean you just get to look at porn anytime you want, because who are you putting your trust in at that point? Well, if Jesus says sex is A and you go, yeah, but I want B, you're no longer serving Christ. You're serving yourself, right? Like that's the entire conversation just iterated into every single thing we do. And we have to be able to have that with our kids before we can give them a smartphone, right? So, which is why 15 is our max. That's the first year you should be able to give a child a smartphone, because at 15 is probably the first time they can start to wrap their brain around that, the first time they're developmentally preparing emotionally to be able to handle some of those big conversations with you and some of the independence. And it's far enough out from them getting total independence at 18 for them to build up that trust. There will probably be mistakes made. You'll have something like Bark in place. You'll have a great router in your home to keep yourself safe. Chris McKenna of Protect Young Eyes does an amazing job of explaining why the router is the best device in your home. Listen to that podcast with him. It's coming up in a couple weeks, and check out Protect Young Eyes because he does an awesome job on that. So I won't delay or belabor that point here, but this is the idea. 15 years old is why we're delaying. We're not saying no. We're not saying never. We are saying not yet, because I love you, because of all those reasons we just talked about. It's an app delivery system. It's distracting with social media and video games, because of bullies and unhealthy people online, right? Stranger danger. And because of pornography, we're going to say no to smartphones. So then we're left with, okay, but what? Your 9-year-old, your 12-year-old, your 13-year-old, 14-year-old comes to you and says, hey, mom and dad, can I have a smartphone? Obviously, this is a conversation for you guys to have. You can choose to give it all early. Some of you might be breaking a sweat because you just gave it to them or you already have done this. I get that. I did not share any of this in hopes of making you feel bad. My hope in sharing this is to make it very clear why delaying is a really, really good option. If you've given your child a smartphone, that's great, as long as you have a system to know what digital trust is and verify that they are earning that. That's great. What we're talking then about is, all right, if it gets out of control, what do we drop back to? So there are dumb phones. The two I really like are the Gab wireless phone and the Wise phone by Go Techless. Those two are excellent. The Wise phone is really for a little bit older age group. It's just a higher quality device, but it's also more expensive. The Gab phone is hyper accessible, very easy to use. Neither of them have the App Store. Neither of them have internet. Neither of them can send or receive images, but they have all the functionality. They have GPS, they have calculators, they have a camera that you can take pictures and store them locally on that phone. And so you do begin to get kind of the training wheels on these devices. And for younger kids, there's even wearables. As much as I dislike them, I know that some families are looking for that next little bump. And so something like a watch that your child can use and tap to call you, right? So that they have something to discuss transportation or emergencies, those kinds of things. Gab has those as well. But that would be really the first go-to. The second is they can begin to use public devices. So the public tablet that's on your home Wi-Fi that does not have cell service, even your own smartphone. Hey, this is your tech time. You can check in on the app. You're going to log in through my profile, and you're going to use that to communicate with your friends because that's where your friends are and you want to be involved with your friends. And really, if we can't get our social mediaing done in under a half hour a day, we're doing it wrong. So if we are saying, hey, social media is how I connect with my friends, it's how I find my place to belong, it's how I connect for real world events, that's cool. You can do that in under 30 minutes a day. And choosing that block of time, saying, hey, we're going to have 10 to 15 minutes after dinner or right before dinner, whatever, to get that done, that's now a section of time that we are going to our tech, we're using it, and we're walking away, rather than it stealing our focus, stealing our time, taking our money, right? The things that it's trying to do. So we are now using the app rather than letting it use us. So those are our healthy alternative options, building up to the point where now we're getting towards 15 and we've proven our digital trust factor, and we've had those hard conversations, and we have that hedge built up around our personal devices and our home network. And now we can say, all right, son or daughter, we're still putting accountability on this because we love you and we want to be there if and when things go wrong. And we're going to start spreading our wings a little bit digitally. We're going to have this. And as long as they're earning that and showing they can be healthy and make those big conversations happen, we're good, right? And if it's not, we're going to the next bump down. Say, hey, we're going to take a break. We're going to take a month off, right? We're going to get rid of that smartphone. We're going to reset our brains. We're going to figure out a healthy way to do it, and figure out where are things going awry, because they can go awry in a lot of ways. So I'm being kind of vague, but it's merely because I don't want to pigeonhole people into one way things can go wrong. I want you to be prayerful, be intentional, and be aware in conversation with your kids. Because again, the end goal here isn't fix your kid. It's not make sure they never make a mistake digitally. It's help them see the digital world for what it is, especially with smartphones. It's built to distract you. That is its goal right now. I hope one day we have devices where all they are is tool tech and you can add drool tech as you go. But right now, these things are designed and implemented to distract you because that's what makes these companies trillion-dollar companies. And as such, they're not meant for young children. In fact, they're barely meant for adults, but we can manage them because our brains are fully developed. Our emotional health is of such that we can ask for help more easily than young people can. And while it's not wise for all of us to have smartphones, and certainly not smartphones in their full capacity, it is something that we can pray through and manage intentionally and model for our kiddos. So I hope this conversation is encouraging for you. I hope that it equips you with practical steps for your young ones and words to say as you talk with them about how to do this. You can reach out to me directly if you have any questions, nathan@gospeltech.net. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Love God Use Tech. And you can join us here next week as we continue this conversation about how we can love God and use tech.